My name is Yupari, and I'd like to invite you into this week's portrait painting demonstration where we will look at a more painterly approach to creating a portrait. And here we have our model Lauren, and I'm going to keep an image of her to the top left corner of your screen so you can refer to it as we develop the painting. So I'm going to read off my palette for you. So I have Zinc White, Raw Umber, Alizarin Crimson, Cadmium Red, Yellow Ochre, Cadmium Yellow, Sap Green, Ultramarine Blue, and Ivory Black. And if you would like to know exactly which materials that I used for this video, all of that information will be typed up in the description box below. So if you're ever curious as to what I'm using, just scroll down and you'll see that information typed up for you. So I'm going to be starting off with just vine charcoal. So this is medium vine charcoal. And I'm just trying to figure out the placement of the head onto the canvas. And so we're going to be starting off with a very loose linear block in. So I'm going to refrain from adding too many details into the portrait. Rather, I'm going to focus on these shapes, just these simple shapes, so that I can place the portrait not so much in the center of the canvas, but a little bit higher up and maybe a little bit to the left. Not really sure yet, but I just want to place the portrait using simple straight lines and angles. I'm able to relate each corner to one another, and I'm trying to work very simply, so I don't want to add in too many details. Pretty much just a peripheral view of what this outside shape looks like to me. So now I just mark the top of the forehead. Here we have a little mark for the part of the hair, and here we have the bottom of the chin, and so just the top of the head and the bottom of the chin for now for the interior shapes. So I'm going to be using this little brush right here to draw a horizontal line. So here we have the shoulders now. So with a few simple straight lines and angles, now we have the corner of the jaw, and as we move our way up, now we have a little angle here for the neck, and then another simple angle there for the side of the forehead. Still nothing too complicated, so I'm going to blur out my lines a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce that straight line, and let's call this the finding stuff stage. The finding stuff stage. So that can be another way of saying just a block in. So this is a block in. We are blocking in the large shapes of the portrait such that we can figure out where the more complicated shapes are going to fit. So this is going to be our initial scaffolding. So now we have a shadow shape right here on the corner, and just a little mark right there is going to give us an accent for the ear. And now we're going to draw a little angle here for the cast shadow, and then another strong angle for the neck. And I should also note that all of these judgments are made just by eye. So I'm pretty much just eyeballing the simple shapes. Later on, we're going to get into some more fine-tuned measurements, and I'll show you how to measure the portrait and get the proportions as close as you can possibly get. But for now, let's just give our eye a chance to figure things out. So I'm using a little chamois cloth. That's just a chamois cloth to help erase some of the charcoal. So that's the nice thing about vine charcoal. It's so easy to make a mark and wipe it off. And it's very useful for placing down big shapes, especially if you're going to go in with large masses of color like we will be doing later on. So again, this is going to be a more painterly approach to creating a portrait painting, also referred to as alla prima, or you can also refer to it as direct painting, where you go in and create the forms directly with paint, even though I'm trying to figure out where things are just using fine charcoal. So I'm erasing the ear here and there, just trying to figure out where everything is going to fit. Here we have a strong angle there. Again, I'm looking at these distances here from one corner of the hair to the edge of the canvas, and then another corner to the edge of the canvas. So now I've pretty much figured out where I want to place the head onto the canvas. Now these aren't the final outlines, but it serves as a place marker for the future shapes to be built upon. So I'm starting off with raw umber, sap green, and a little bit of yellow ochre. And we're going to be developing this painting in a very painterly fashion. So we're going to be working directly with oil paint and sculpting the forms kind of like a sculptor would do if they were working with a block of clay. And then we're going to build more of the accuracy on top of that large color scaffolding. So one thing I should note is that I'm not using any medium at all at this stage. So this you can also refer to as dry brushing. So very important when you're starting out a painting that you're going to try and complete in one sitting. So that is, you're working on an alla prima portrait painting or alla prima any kind of painting. In the beginning, you really don't want to use a lot of medium. You don't want to use a lot of oil. Now the fat over lean principle to oil painting also kind of extends to working in alla prima. So that is, it's easier for thinned out paint to sit on top of thick paint. So right now we're painting very thick. We're not using any medium at all, and we're just mushing the paint into the surface. So now I'm going to be using a combination of ivory black, raw umber, and perhaps a tad bit of alizarin crimson to paint in another dark mass of the hair. So what we're doing right now is we're massing in the large value and color relationships, and we're going to be working each shape next to its corresponding shape. So I'm not going to be working on, say, the left of the canvas and then all of a sudden move to the right of the canvas. Instead, I'm going to be relating one corner, one shape to its corresponding shape. That is the hair mass in relation to the shadow mass. And mass just means a large region of value and color. Now, when you're working in this way, you really just want to push the paint into the canvas. Very much just dry brushing at this phase. So now with a little bit of alizarin crimson and some ivory black, we're going to try and differentiate this corner for the side of the neck. Again, we're going to build the specificity on top of this, and I will show you how we get more specific. But for now, we're going to be sticking with these large, simple masses of value and color. So here we have a little shape here for where we believe that the ear is going to go. And now here's the little corner for the back of the hair. And very much just trying to establish my dark shapes. So I'm starting off with the darkest values, and I'm going to be building my way up to the light. So now we're going to add just a little more yellow ochre into this mixture to get kind of a greenish color. And we're going to let this be the first pass for the hair mass, the light area of the hair mass. So blonde hair typically has a little bit of greenish hue into the mixtures, not always the case, but I'm going to be starting off this blonde hair color with a little bit of a greenish color. So that was pretty much just raw umber and yellow ochre primarily. And again, I'm pretty much dry brushing. I'm just pushing that brush into the canvas. And it kind of has a lot of grip when you don't use any medium. So it does take kind of a little bit of force to push it in there. And so now we're going to be putting the little dark right underneath of the jaw right here. still kind of scrubbing it on. So with the hair, you want to really split it up into regions of light and dark, rather than just making it one flat area. Just look at these simple patterns of light and dark with the hair. You can kind of think of it like a tree. Like you can imagine a tree in a sunset has a very defined area of light and area of shade. Even though they're not razor sharp, since it is a tree, you still see a very definitive delineation between the light and the shadow. So that's what we're doing with the hair mask, and we're not too worried about the outline of the hair just yet. We're just trying to fill in the masses. Using simple straight lines and angles is going to help you draw more precisely, but in this case, I'm pretty much just filling in these large areas with oil paint. So now I actually did introduce a little bit of medium onto the shirt. And the reason that I'm choosing to apply more medium onto the shirt is because I'm not going to be adding too many layers onto the shirt. It's pretty much just going to be one little shape of value. Now the areas that I do want to layer, such as the hair, the shadow, and the flesh tones, I will use no medium in the beginning so that I can build onto those layers with more thinned out applications of paint. And so with the shirt, I'm not really bothering too much with it, so I'm just using a little bit of my odorless mineral spirits and a tad bit of medium. And so the medium that I'm going to be using for this painting is a different medium. So I'll be using a medium called Neo-Megilp. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's kind of a fast dryer, but not as fast as the Galkid that I was using before. And so it gives me a nice consistency to thin out the paint and not have it dry terribly fast and not have it be a slow dryer as well. So now we're going to be mixing up Ultramarine Blue and Alizarin Crimson. And the background is going to be dry brushed as well. A little bit, but not overly dry brushed. And the reason being is that I'm going to go over the background with the design that you see in the photo reference of the little leaves and flowers and such. But I don't want to make it overly thin in the background. It has a little medium, but it's not really that much. It's probably just a little dab of the Neo-Megilp. And again, if you're new to oil painting, we use medium to thin out the paint, usually, to increase the consistency of the paint, making it a little bit more fluid, rather than trying to thin it out with the odorless mineral spirits. Now, it is helpful to thin it out with the mineral spirits, but primarily I think it's a good idea to use a nice medium, such as this Neo-Megilp, or you could use a combination of stand oil and mineral spirits as well. That works just fine too. So now with this this background mask, we're actually going to be delineating the top of the hair. So that's going to give us a nice little shape for where the top of the head is going to fit. So now we're just going to fill in the rest of the background color. And again, the background color is pretty much just alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and maybe a tad bit of raw umber just to neutralize the violet or the purple that you get out of combining alizarin with ultramarine. And so now we're going to be mixing up a color to apply onto the light masses of the skin tone. So with just a combination of cadmium red and cadmium yellow, a tad bit of zinc white to raise up the value, and we neutralized it a little bit with the raw umber. We have a very basic flesh tone. Now the model is under warm light. It's a very warm light. So the flesh tones are going to be a little bit more on the reddish side, but not too red either. So we're going to be dry brushing the paint onto this shape, and now the shape is going to be somewhat important. So we're going to be filling in this mass of color, and the reason that we're filling in this mass of color in this way is so that we can build on top of it with either darker values or lighter values. And the consistency of the paint is going to be kind of important too, especially since we're working in alla prima, so completing this painting in one day. We're going to be starting off very, very thick. So this paint is extremely thick. We're working with a very loaded brush, and we're scrubbing it onto the surface kind of very forcefully there, and we're taking note of the overall color mass. So this color that I've mixed up is probably about maybe in my head it's probably the average flesh tone that you would see. So the color is kind of thought out such that it's kind of like the average flesh tone that you would see there. The consistency of the paint is also thought out, so it's very thick, so we can come back in with thinner paint. And the way that we're applying the paint is such that we can come back in and reevaluate the outside shape later. Now, when you're working in this way, it also provides a kind of a grip. So when you're dry brushing your initial statements of color in this way, it also adds more grip to the painting. So as you add more and more shapes on top of this using your medium, it's going to actually stick onto the painting a little bit easier than if you were to start off with very thin paint, or even if you started off with a thin wash of oil paint, that can sometimes get really slick. So this is also providing a grip to paint on top of. And so after we've stated all of our color and value mass relationships, meaning after all of these large shapes are filled, we're going to go and start to draw the information into the portrait. So this right here is a plexiglass T-square. And so this T-square is going to help us get our center line. So we're seeing the model, we're observing the model from frontal view, very much front and centered. So symmetry is going to be kind of a thing here. Trying to eyeball a horizontal line is extremely difficult. It's kind of like hanging up a picture on a wall and hoping that it's going to be perfectly balanced. It's not always that simple to do by eye, so I recommend to get a T-square, and especially a transparent one like this is actually pretty useful. And so now we're using a size 0 round brush with some raw umber, and it's thinned out a tad bit. Now we're going to be measuring halfway. So halfway from the top of the head to the bottom of the jaw is going to be the axis of the eyes. So the axis of the eyes will be going from one tear duct to the other, dividing pretty much the face in half. So with a little dry erase marker here, we've marked the top, and we've marked the center, and we've marked the bottom. So now we're going to go in and make a little mark there, and we're going to use the horizontal of the T-square to make a horizontal line, which would otherwise be very difficult to do by eye. So having this T-square to help you with this is extremely useful. So now again, we're going to mark from the top of the head, so that is going to be the forehead, and it's going to be 1/3 of the portrait, another third is going to be the nose, and another third, the last third, is going to be the bottom of the jaw. So that divides the portrait into thirds. And so now we're going to make little marks here again to place the axes of the features. Just a little dot for a place marker. So here we're going to have a axis right here for the eyebrows. Again, the top of the forehead to the eyebrows is about a third. Now this is the general canon of proportions. You should always check that your model, or you should relate these canons of proportions to your model. Now my model follows these canons of proportion very closely. The only change is really that the nose is a little bit further down. So we're going to move that t-square just a little bit below that point, but it's such a tiny change, very minute. That's why I say that I think that the frontal view is one of the most difficult, because the drawing is that much, it requires that much more precision. So now we're going to go ahead and use another measurement. So now from the top of the forehead to the bottom of the jaw, the bottom of the chin is going to give us a relationship. So we're going to be relating a vertical to a horizontal. So now from one extreme corner of the face to another extreme corner of the face, this relationship is going to give us the width of the head. After making that measurement, I realized that I had the outside shape of the face a little bit too wide. So this mark right here is going to tell me how far I need to correct. So I'm going to be moving the shadow shape to that mark that I placed. So that's just going to be there for me to know that I need to correct that later on. So here's another measurement that we're going to use. From the eyebrows to the tear duct, this distance right here is the same as from the bottom of the nose to the mouth. So we're going to use our little dry erase to make a mark on our t-square. Now we're going to come back in and make a little mark right here. I will say that I'm using raw umber diluted with a little bit of mineral spirits to make these marks on top of that flesh tone. So again, you can kind of see how easily the thin paint sticks right onto the thicker layer of paint. And now we're going to go and start to draw more shapes for the features of the face. So now we have a little mark here for the bottom of the nose. Like I said, the model follows the ideal canon of proportions very closely. That means from the top of her forehead to her eyebrows is 1/3, and from her eyebrows to her nose is also 1/3, but the nose is just a little bit below, just a tiny bit below. Now we're going to be relying on that center line to center the nose. This is going to be very important, so we make sure that we don't have a nose that's kind of falling off the edge of the portrait. And so having these points right here, these are going to be the tear ducts, just little simple indications for the tear ducts. And the tear ducts are going to match up kind of vertically with the corners of the nose. So now we're kind of imagining the corner of the wing of the nose on one side, and here's the corner of the wing of the nose on the other side. And now here we have a little shape right about here. So I'm observing that one eyebrow is a little bit higher up than the other. So the eyebrow to the left of your screen is a little bit higher up than the eyebrow to the right of your screen. That could also be the way that the photo reference was taken. So I'm going to take note of that, but I'm going to try and draw as accurately as I possibly can. And we're using just simple straight lines and angles, and we're using the oil paint just like we would if we were doing a charcoal drawing or a graphite drawing, with the same attention to shape and proportion. Remember, proportion just means a relation from one shape to another shape. That's all a proportion is. It's just a relation. So here we have now a little shape for the eyebrows. And again, I'm just using raw umber to draw these shapes in. Just raw umber diluted with a tad bit of mineral spirits and with a little bit of my medium. So here we have the other eyebrow. And at this point, let's not worry about the aesthetics. So let's just focus on placement. That's all we're focused on. Right now, we're just trying to answer the question of where do things go. Once we figure out where these things go, then we're going to switch to large form modeling. So we're going to be sculpting out the planes on top of this. So we first want to know where things fit. So we just drew in the shape for the cast shadow of the nose. I'm not too focused on the values just yet. I'm just focused on the placement of such things. So now we have the bottom of the mouth and we have the top of the mouth. Starts very, very simply. So now with the eyes, here we have one corner of the eye to the left, and here we have another corner of the eye to the right. And we want to make sure that the distance between the eyes is the length of one of the eyes. So what does that mean? So let's look at this distance right here. This is the length of one eye. Move it over and we reach the other eye. So that's how we know how far apart these distances are. And so now we have that drawing in place. We know where the features are going to fit. So now we're going to go in with a little bit of ivory black, raw umber, yellow ochre, and a tad bit of sap green for the cast shadow of the nose. So now we're filling in just a very simplified shape. And now we have a little shape for the corner of the side of the glabella. And now we have a little shape here for the plane of the side of the eye socket. So we're using a large flat brush actually. So we're going to be sculpting these shapes kind of like a sculptor would if this was a big block of clay. So now with each little carve, you can see kind of like a chisel, we're making some halftones. So here we have a little shape here for the corner of the side of the eye. And now we're going to have kind of a darker halftone right below the lower lip. And with a little bit of cadmium red, alizarin crimson, and some raw umber, we're going to be filling in a warm color for the lips, just to kind of differentiate the local color of the lips from the local color of the flesh tones. And again, local color just means the average color that something has. So on average, the lips are a little bit more pinkish reddish than the surrounding colors. So now that we have our features placed onto this outside shape of the face, we're going to go in with some of the halftones. We're going to be building some subtle halftones. So it's just a simple combination of alizarin crimson and sap green. You know that I like to mix those colors. So just alizarin crimson, sap green. We're going to be making a nice neutral flesh tone that we're going to use for the dark light of the side of the forehead. This little halftone right here. You can picture this as a plane that's turning away from the light. So this is how we're going to be creating the volume of the head by changing planes. So a plane change is just indicated by a value change. So the value change alone will give you the effect of something turning in space. Now the color of the forehead is a little bit more pinkish than the initial color statement that we had before. And so we're actually using a synthetic brush now. So with the first pass, it was dry brushed with no medium with a pretty thick bristle brush. But now we're using a little bit more medium with our flesh tones. and a softer synthetic brush. And that's going to help you layer the paint on. So sometimes it may seem like we're painting uh, onto a dry painting, but in fact this is working wet on wet. It just happens to be that when you apply thin paint over top of thicker paint, so that is using more medium as you progress the painting, it will allow the paint to stick onto the surface. So the advantage of that dry brushing that we did in the beginning was that it provided a nice grip to these passages of paint that we're going to be adding. So we're just going to reinforce this tone for the shadow of the nose. So just a nice rich dark here, but not overly dark. I don't want it to be ivory black or anything like that. So just a combination of the colors that were on the palette helped us to create a nicer dark tone for the shadow of the nose. So now we have another half tone just as we approach the side plane of the nose. And again, a plane is just indicated by a value change. So that right there was one very sharp plane for the side of the zygomatic area. So the zygomatic region is the cheekbone region. So now we're going to be adding another halftone as we approach the top plane of the cheek. So now it's a little bit more cadmium red just to get a little bit more of a pinkish hue, and our zinc white and a little more of the cadmium red. We're going to get a nice halftone right here for the side plane of the cheek as it approaches the nose. Now this is a color change as well. So the value is a little bit darker, but not that dark. And the color is a little bit more on the pinkish side in relation to the surrounding colors. Color is something that you perceive. You relate one color to another color and try to get it as close to nature as you can possibly get it, but the value is a little bit more conceptual. So with each value change, we're picturing a plane change, a physical plane that's changing away from the light. So in that sense, the color choices are pretty much optical, whereas the value changes are more conceptual based on our conceptualization of the location of that plane in relation to the light source. So as you can tell, the planes of the eye sockets, as they curve in towards the tear ducts, are getting darker because that shape is turning further and further away from the light source. And as we approach this area right here to the top of the nose, this is actually a color change as opposed to simply being just a value change. So that this area of the nose has a little bit more blood flow, so it's going to be more on the pinkish side. So it's going to have more pink to it. Now we're going to go with our T-square and we're going to reestablish the location of the eyes. So again, it's important to use a T-square whenever possible, especially when you're painting a portrait where the model is front and center to you. So now just checking that the width of the eye is equal to the distance between the eyes. So just double checking that measurement. Now we're going to go and cut in the corner of the side of the eye right here. So this is going to be one extremity of the left, and this is going to be one extremity of the right. Very simple, just a few little indications there to make sure that the shape is placed where we want it to be placed. So here is the top of the curve. This is the peak of convexity. Imagine it as the very top of the roller coaster just as the line starts to go further and further down. Now let's look at the top of the curve for the eye to the left of your screen. So here's the peak of convexity. The top of the roller coaster is right there. So with a combination of zinc white And ivory black, we have a nice cool color that we're going to use to paint the local color of the sclera. So remember, the sclera is the white of the eye, but it's not white, even though I just said I used white and black. The reason I use those two is to get a nice cooler note that I can use to indicate that local color change. Now, the paint underneath is of course still wet, so the reason that I'm only using white and black is because I know that this paint is going to be influenced by the wet paint underneath. So with the white of the eye, it's kind of helpful to use kind of a bluish gray influenced with a tiny bit of flesh tone, but not that much. You don't want to have too much pink in the white of the eye. So now we're going to go in with a little bit of ultramarine blue and ivory black and a tiny bit, just a little sprinkle of sap green for the dark of the eye. Right here, we're going to be painting in the dark shape of the eye. Now, eyes can be a little tricky, especially when you're working wet on wet. That is, you do not have a previous under drawing. And so I would advise trying to keep it as minimal as possible and don't worry about the details. Just focus on the most essential bits of information that you can see at a distance. That's going to be really important, and that's kind of something that you see in a lot of old master paintings. You can see it in Velázquez paintings. You can see it in John Singer Sargent paintings. So here we have just a little dash of alizarin crimson to put in a dark shape for the side of the eye. Just very simple notes, simple accents that can be seen at a distance to help us place in the most important bits of information. And of course, we're going to build, this is going to be built onto. So here we have another dark shape for the top of the roller coaster right there. And we're going to be using more and more of our medium as we apply these shapes, but not too much. Not too much medium, just a little bit. And I like to use round brushes when I'm painting in these smaller shapes. A round brush, such as this one, gives you a fine point, and it's very similar to a sharpened piece of charcoal or the top of a pencil, graphite pencil. Very similar feeling with the round brush. So here we have another accent for the dark shape for the corner of the eye to the left of your screen. And now we're going to be painting in just another dark shape for the top. Again, very minimalistic, and painting it in such a way that if we do get it wrong, if the eyes are maybe a little bit too high up or a little bit too far down, we can easily make those changes, even though we measured the proportions in the beginning. That does not guarantee that the features are going to be placed in the right spot. So sometimes you do need to tweak the shapes now and then. So you want to have your shapes very workable so that you can maneuver them if you need to. But this is how we add on the specificity of the shapes, by using a little size 1 or size 0 round brush and just building and building. And when you're painting, try and think of the drawing. Imagine your painting as just a graphite drawing or a charcoal drawing. Just try to envision it as a drawing. Now we have a little bit too much light in this area, so we're going to blend it in there with some ivory black. So think of it as a drawing. The secret to portrait painting is portrait drawing. The secret to painting representational painting, that is painting something that resembles something, is the ability to draw. I believe anyone can learn to draw. All it takes is practice, patience and motivation, and you can learn how to draw. And it's all about visual thinking, relating one corner of the face to the other corner of the face side by side, and standing back and checking your proportions, relating each shape to one another. That is the key to drawing. It's all about gauging the proportions and the shapes in relation to one another. So here we have the dark light of the nose. So now we're going to start to add in more volume to the shape of the nose, but we're going to keep it very painterly. We are building this painting wet on wet, painting directly onto the canvas. That is, we're not using an underdrawing or an underpainting. So we're trying to add in as much information as we can, yet keeping it very painterly and minimalistic. So now we just put in another side plane that's a little bit more on the yellowish side, and with a little bit of the zinc white and some yellow ochre, we have a nice highlight for the top of the bulb of the nose. And let's just soften this little corner a little bit. It's important to make sure that it reads at a distance, and if it reads at a distance and you're working in ala prima, let it be, because there's going to be so much more that you're going to want to describe, that if you spend too much time on the small shapes, especially when you're trying to make a painting in one sitting, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So now we're going to paint in the side plane of the lips. Now the lips are not in shadow. I think the only shadow is going to be the dark accents for where the upper lip meets the lower lip and the corners of the mouth. I believe those are going to be the only shadows for the lips. So the lips are pretty much all in frontal light. So here we have the dark accent for one corner of the lip. Very minimalistic, trying to keep it such that I don't paint anything in that I don't have to paint in there to get the forms to read. And so with a little bit more of the cadmium red and a tiny bit of cadmium yellow, we have a light for the lower lip. And then we're going to use a little more alizarin crimson to paint onto the top plane of the lip. It's a little bit more of a deeper red, but not quite as saturated as the photo reference. The photo reference is a little bit more saturated than nature, so we're going to not make it as saturated as the photo reference. So we're just trying to figure out these little edges now. So the top of the lip right here, it's going to be a little bit softer than that of the bottom left of the lip. So the bottom left of the lip is going to be a little bit sharper, and the top right of the lip is going to be probably one of the sharpest edges of the lip. And here we have a little light plane right here for the philtrum. That shape is known as the philtrum of the mouth, the shape in between the nose and the mouth. So here we have a little halftone for the concavity of the philtrum, and a little side plane right here, pretty much just using a raw umber just to create those halftones. And just soften this little edge on the corner of the philtrum. Just a few little touches will do for that. And now we're going to add just a few more little plane changes for the philtrum of the lips. So here we have another halftone, but that's a little lighter. So the halftone's a little bit lighter than the halftone to the left of it. And so now we're going to relate that to the highlight, or the highlight region of the philtrum being this area right here. And we're just trying to soften it, just make it very, very soft, as close to nature as possible. In nature, we can't really see too many sharp edges on the philtrum. The photo reference does sharpen it a little bit more than I believe it would be. And so now, I'm sorry that the camera angle is a little bit blurry, but here we have the dark of the eye with ultramarine blue and a little bit of raw umber. And now we're going to go in with the zinc white and a tad bit of the ultramarine blue, and there we have the highlight of the eye. And this is why I like to use glass palettes a lot, because all you need is a razor and there you go, clean palette. Very nice and easy and simple. So we just cleaned off a portion of the palette to create some of the mixtures that we're going to use for the hair. So now we're going to get into some more information onto the blonde hair. So we started off with that kind of greenish mixture. So the sap green, yellow ochre, raw umber passage that we had is going to be uh, built upon now with some more uh, yellowish notes for the lights and some deeper reds for the darks. So now we're going in with a consistency of paint that's a little bit thinner. So we're using a little bit of our medium now to thin out the paint so that it sticks onto the previous layer. So now we're going to be using the raw umber and the yellow ochre mixture, and we're painting in a light plane onto this area of the hair. So the key word is going to be plane. We're subdividing the areas of the hair into planes. Now, they aren't physically planes in nature, it's just hair that is twisting and turning in different areas. They aren't really as defined as the planes of the face. So we're going to be conceptualizing the hair into a three-dimensional structure that has the effect of planes in space. So now we added a little darker shape here for the bottom. And that's not really a shadow, it's actually a shimmer. It's kind of a shimmering effect that the hair is having in relation to the light. So now we're going to add a little more alizarin into this little area here. So with some more yellow ochre and the zinc white, we're going to be adding some more light right on the bottom here. But don't worry, we're going to come back in with some more of the cadmium yellow, because though there's a lot of green in the blonde hair, we're going to need some more of this cadmium yellow now to add the effects of the warm notes of the hair and softening the transitions between each shape as we go with just a delicate touch of the paintbrush. So now we're pushing down and starting to soften these transitions as we go. And it's going to be a little bit deeper and darker right about here. So that's going to be a deeper and darker shape. And we're going to be patting it down to soften that edge. So it's a little bit warmer, it's a little bit darker, and the transition is going to be softer. And so now we're going to use more paint, more medium, and with a combination of alizarin and cadmium yellow, now we're going to be getting more of a lighter plane change for the side right about here, still trying to keep a very soft touch. So we're going to try and get the effect of individual strands of hair with the application of the brush strokes. So the brush strokes are going to be left to show to try and get the effect of the individual bands of hair. So now we're going to be softening that area right about there. So we're trying to feel out the volume of the hair. Each region of the hair is going to have a specific value pattern that it has to adhere to. So just softening that should do it. So now we're going to start to add some fun stuff into the background. So we're going to be adding some little design element into the background. So now the photo reference is really just going to be a photo reference. We're not copying the photograph. So we're going to be creating our own kind of thing for the background. So the background is going to have these little leaves that are going in and out. Maybe they're little vines. Who knows what they are? In your painting, it can be whatever you want it to be. But I just kind of see these little design leaves or vines that are in the background. So I'm using a very simple combination of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson and the zinc white, and that's pretty much it. And I'm using a size 1 round brush. This is a very thin mixture of paint with a very thin and simple synthetic brush. I think this is a watercolor brush. So now we have a very simple design element into the background, motivated from the photo reference, but not copied from the photo reference. And now we're just going to finish off this painting by softening some of the edges on the face with a very cheap watercolor brush that is very kind of silky to help us soften out some of the edges here. And I tend to do this whenever I'm working in Alla Prima because the paint is still wet and it allows me to soften these edges with a nice little touch of the brush. We're going to get a little soft transition here in the corner of the lip, but now we're going to have to come back in and reestablish that shape. So again, with the red that we use for the lip, now we're going to reestablish that. And there you have it. That's going to be it for this week's portrait painting demonstration. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that these videos are helping you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you next week.